going to talk about slavery at the University of Virginia from the beginning to the end of the Civil War in 1865. However, I hope that it won't generate the kind of controversy that happened here in Minor Hall 13 years ago when a black faculty member from Virginia Commodore University gave a speech calling for the apology to African American slaves. It resulted in kind of like a mini riot, and it resulted in an unsuccessful lawsuit accusing university police of excessive force, violation of First Amendment rights, and it led to the creation of another ad hoc committee. By my count, there have been at least 45 committees here at the university dealing with issues like that, dealing with race and the treatment of minorities at UVA. Now, the Board of Business has issued some sort of apology to statement of regret for blacks who were accountable for buildings here at the University of Virginia. They did that on Jefferson's anniversary of his birthday about 3 years ago. Slaves were the main building force that built the buildings here at UVA in 1819 and the 1850s. Most were hired from local slave owners. Also, one of the things that was done to slaves during this period was, then as now, the university tried to raise money all the time. And what happened was that some people around the county policy would give the university money. They couldn't. It became time to handle the money. They couldn't. So the university struck a deal with these people in exchange for them not being able to get money. They said, if you allow your slaves to work at the university for 2 months, that'll pay off the debt. So slaves were used as collateral as far as helping to finance the university in order to help build it. After Jefferson's death, several of his slaves were purchased by local slave owners as part of the settlement of his estate. And some of those slaves were purchased by faculty members as well and wound up here working at the university. One of these slaves, Henry Martin, who was actually born on the day Jefferson died, later became the University of Virginia bell ringer, starting in 1845, and he spent 53 years working as a bell ringer here at the university, for which he received the princely sum of $12.50 a month. However, after his retirement, the university did continue to pay his salary until his death in 1919. But the first full-time black employee at the University of Virginia was a slave. His name was Commodore. He was purchased for $580 in 1832. And he continued to work faithfully at his task for several years until he was eventually fired by the University of Virginia. They claimed that he liked to drink too much and that he was increasingly becoming disrespectful, and so they wound up firing him. Hired slaves were used at the university to make life comfortable for the staff and the students and faculty. One hired slave was assigned to every 20 students at the university. And their duties consisted of polishing the boots, keeping the candlesticks lit, keeping the fireplace with firewood, and that sort of thing. Speaking of Jefferson, there he is, and I'm still trying to track this down. My personal policy historian is I try to find 3 citations or something before I will publish it. There is an unsubstantiated story that Jefferson either instituted or permitted the establishment of a house of prostitution staffed by free black slave women at the university to cater to the sexual needs of the white male students here in the 19th century. Slaves had a sexual purpose for staff and faculty at the university. They also had a purpose after they were dead. Beginning in the 1830s, dead UVA slaves continued their servitude as anatomical specimens. In the medical school back then secretly hired professional slave robbers who went to black cemeteries, dug these people up, for which they received $17.50 for each body. As for other buildings constructed by the university, at Dawson's Road, for example, was the result of a bequeath to the University of Virginia. 6 houses were built there. Today, only one of those houses survives. It is known as the Luther P. Jackson House, Office of African American Affairs. Now, as I said earlier, faculty were allowed to purchase and house their slaves at UVA in the basement of the building, but students were prohibited from having slaves on the property. A typical student at UVA before the Civil War was a white male southerner who was enslaved. So what these students had to do was they had to sometimes seat their slaves on the property, give them their assignments, and then send them to Charlottesville to fulfill their work requests. And in those days, Charlottesville was about 3 miles away. As I said earlier, faculty members did own slaves. Professor John Stage Davis, a professor of anatomy, was famous for it. He purchased slaves throughout his entire career here. He bought one slave woman for $700. In 1862, he purchased a family of 5, which was a mother and 4 children, with a small amount of money as well. When we get to the Civil War, there are expenditure reports that indicate that university faculty and staff earned extra money by hiring their students to the Confederacy. During the war, the University of Virginia's main claim to fame was that it was a Confederate hospital, part of the complex known as the Charlottesville General Hospital. And slaves were used for this labor, including some of the university slaves. They were paid in clothing, they were paid in food, and if they were lucky, they were paid in cash. They worked as nurses, scavengers, laundresses, firewood procurers, and all kinds of other menial tasks to take care of the sick and wounded Confederate soldiers that were here. But they also took advantage of escape opportunities. 10 of them escaped in June 1864 during a raid by the Union Army. When the Union Army finally occupied Charlottesville and the University of Virginia in the spring of 1865, several university slaves transitioned from freedom to slavery because for the first time in their life, they were not only free, but they could also earn wages that they got to keep in their own pockets. And when the Union soldiers left the area to move on to other areas, at least 10 of these people went with them. Now, we don't know enough about slavery at UVA, but even when we do know, the university sometimes ignores or literally seeks to bury this aspect. I know where the bodies are buried. Normally I'd be speaking metaphorically when I say that, but I'm actually talking about I know where the bodies are buried. For example, Gooch Dillard Dorm. There is a slave cemetery in the area of Gooch Dillard Dorm. The painful part about this is that while the dorms were being constructed, the family who had owned those slaves, the Murray family, which had a plantation here, kept telling the university, you can't build there, there's a slave cemetery there. And the university kept ignoring it. And we were talking about a white family that reminded the university of this. When they were actually breaking the ground, one white woman came out who was a descendant. She said, what are you going to do about the slave graves? No one would believe her. Eventually, an anthropological professor did some research, dug up the area. He didn't find bodies, but he found remains of graves. So now we know that the cemetery is there, and all of a sudden, mysteriously in 1984, 85, a plaque appeared on the steps at Gooch Dillard Dorm commemorating these slave graves. But nobody at the university will admit to putting this plaque up, or who funded it, or how it went there. They tried to tell me that it was a public ceremony that was here. Well, I was here in 1985, and there was no public ceremony that I knew about. Anyway, the legacy of slavery has been commemorated here in a variety of ways. Dr. Walter Nathaniel Ridley, who was the first African-American graduate of the University of Virginia, was the grandson of slaves, and at the first Black Alumni Weekend in 1987, his scholarship was established in his honor. The Office of African American Affairs Turner Library, which is a small undergraduate library, is the only facility in the state of Virginia named after Nat Turner, who was a slave freedom fighter in the 1830s. It's the only facility in the state named after him, and it was a source of controversy when it was. There's much more I could say, obviously, but I will conclude by saying what I just said before. I said this in one of my books. African American history is not for the squeamish. You have to have a strong stomach to deal with African American history, and not just through the slavery period. At the University of Virginia, like America, much of the history of African Americans consists of not so much what they accomplished, but rather what was done to them, what was done to keep them from accomplishing. So I hope that now is the time that we can overcome that kind of neglect. Thank you.